Hello everyone. So in this video, we're going to be talking about nuclear energy as a reliable energy source. So throughout the course of the video, we're going to be talking about what it is, how does it work, its advantages and disadvantages, and lastly, its uses to us. Without further ado, let's go to the first topic in what is nuclear energy. So when you hear the words nuclear energy, what does comes to mind? I mean, most people would immediately think it's radioactive, it's toxic, it's bad for the environment, it's dangerous, etc. and etc. and more. I mean, it's not really quite wrong, but it's not really the in-depth analysis of what nuclear energy is. So, for starters, nuclear energy is a form of energy that is released from the nucleus, the core of atoms made up of protons and neutrons. Specifically, it's just the binding energy of an atom that is extracted to form electricity, that is nuclear energy. When talking about nuclear energy, one question bursts to mind. How do we extract or obtain this nuclear energy from the binding energy of an atom? So, there are three distinct ways in order to extract the binding energy from an atom, which is the nuclear fission, the nuclear fusion, and nuclear decay. The most common and most viable one used is the nuclear fusion, in which it is a reaction that a nucleus of an atom splits into two or more smaller nuclei. An alternative way is a nuclear fusion, in which a reaction of two or more atomic nuclei are combined to form one or more different atomic nuclei and subatomic particles. And lastly, the nuclear decay, a process by which an unstable atomic molecule loses energy by radiation. With all of that information gathered, one could have sparked the question, where does it all occur? So, this is where the nuclear power plant comes in. A nuclear power plant is a thermal power station in which the heat source is a nuclear reactor. The nuclear reactor is where all the nuclear reaction in which nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, or nuclear decay takes place. As a typical of thermal power station, heat is used to generate steam that drives a steam turbine connected to a generator that produces electricity. So basically, nuclear power plants is just a clean and efficient way of boiling water to make steam, which turns turbines to produce electricity. It sounds as simple, but it is not, since there are 8 steps involving in generating nuclear energy in nuclear power plants. First is that the reaction is triggered. So the reaction vessel is a steel capsule that houses fuel elements, sealed metal cylinders containing uranium. Neutrons are fired at the uranium atoms, causing them to split and release more neutrons. This then hit another atoms, causing more splits, and so the chain reaction continues. It's this chain reaction that generates huge amount of heat next needed for the next stage. After that reaction is triggered, the water is then heated. As water is passed through the reactor vessel, where the chain reaction heats it around 300 degrees Celsius. The water needs to stay in liquid form for the power station to work, so the pressurizer applies around 155 times atmospheric pressure to stop it from boiling and evaporating. After, when the water is heated, the hot water is then circulated, as a coolant pump then circulates the hot, pressurized water from the reactor vessel through a steam generator. When the water is circulated, steam is then created. This hot, pressurized water flows through thousands of loop pipes, while a second stream of water flows around the outside of the pipes. This water is under much less pressure, so the heat from the pipes boils it into the steam. After that, steam is converted into electrical energy. The steam passes through a series of turbines and causes them to spin. This converts the steam's heat energy into mechanical energy. A shaft then connects the turbines, which are spinning at 3000 revs per minute, to a generator. The generator is then used as an electromagnetic field to convert this mechanical energy into electrical energy. Then, electrical energy is passed to national grid, in which a transformer converts the electrical energy to the high voltage needed by the national grid. After that, electricity is sent through power lines to homes. The national grid then uses high voltage to transmit electricity efficiently through the power lines, and at the end of the power lines are the homes, businesses, and services that uses the electricity. Here, other transformers reduce the voltage back down to a usable level. After that, the steam is cooled and recycled. Once the steam has done its job in the generator, it needs to be cooled, and it is passed over pipes full of cold water pumped in from the sea. This cools the steam and condenses it back into water. It's then piped back into the steam generator, where it can be reheated, turned into steam again, keeping the turbines turning and the electricity generation going. So, it's pretty much as complicated as to the other forms of generating electricity. Now, we got the gist of how nuclear power plants work. Let's move on to its advantages and disadvantages. First of its advantages, that it is low cost. It is low cost in a way that nuclear energy has the advantage of being one of the most cost-effective energy solutions available. The cost to produce electricity from nuclear energy is much lower than the cost to produce energy from gas, coal, or oil, unless those resources are located near the power plant they supply. Nuclear energy also has the added benefit of facing comparatively low risk for cost inflation, unlike traditional fossil fuels that regularly fluctuate in price. Second is that it is a reliable source of energy. While some energy sources are dependent upon weather conditions like solar or wind power, nuclear energy has no such constraints. It doesn't matter if the wind isn't blowing or if the day is cloudy. Nuclear power plants are essentially unaffected by external climatic factors and create predictable and steady energy output. A nuclear power plant in full swing operation can produce energy non-stop for an entire year, which allows for a good return on investment because there is no delay in energy production. Nuclear power plants are also reliable because we have enough uranium on the planet to generate for the next 70 to 80 years. While that may not sound like a long time, for it's longer than many fossil fuels are estimated to last, and there are other nuclear energy sources being explored to power nuclear power plants. The third is it is stable base load energy. You may not realize it, but nuclear energy is widely used in America. In fact, it makes up around 20% of all electricity generated in the United States. This efficient energy source comes from the 98 nuclear power reactors dotted around 30 different states in the United States. The stable production of power created by nuclear power plants means that it can be ideally be used in conjunction with other forms of renewable energy. For example, wind turbines generate significant amounts of power when the wind blows. When the wind is blowing, nuclear power plants can adjust energy output to be lower. Conversely, when the wind is not blowing and greater energy is needed, nuclear energy can be adjusted to compensate for the lack of wind or solar generated power. Next is that it produces low pollution. When it comes to pollution, it's clear that there are pros and cons of nuclear energy. And don't worry, we'll touch the issue on the nuclear waste in a moment. However, the overall output of pollution from a nuclear power plant is quite low compared with energy production from fossil fuels. The current consumption of nuclear energy already reduces over 555 million metric tons of emissions every year. This reduction in greenhouse gases is a great indicator of how switching to nuclear energy can help reduce our effect on global climate change in the long run. Next is that it has sufficient fuel availability. Like fossil fuels, the uranium also used to supply nuclear power plants is in limited supply. However, our uranium reserves are estimated to last another 80 years, whereas fossil fuels have a much more limited lifespan. Since the Industrial Revolution, we have been consistently and constantly depleting our fossil fuel reserves. If we continue consuming fossil fuels and keep increasing our consumption as the world population grows, we are estimated to run out of oil by 2052, gas in 2060, and coal by 2088. Of course, there are more fossil fuels discoveries we have yet to make, but they are fewer and farther between than ever and will eventually run out. Switching to uranium might give us extra time we need to find better and cleaner renewable energy sources. Plus, some countries like India, China, and Russia are already working towards using the greener and more abundant thorium-powered nuclear reactors. If we switch to thorium, we have even longer than 80 years of fuel available. However, if scientists are able to turn nuclear fusion into a reality, we would be theoretically never run out of energy again. Turning nuclear energy into sustainable energy requires the use of breeder reactors and nuclear fusion to sustain us from the foreseeable future. Lastly, it has high energy density. On our list of the pros and cons of nuclear energy, this one is quite astounding. Nuclear fission, which is the process used to generate nuclear energy, releases much greater amounts of energy than simply burning fossil fuels like gas, oil, or coal. Nuclear fission is nearly 80 times more efficient at producing energy than traditional fossil fuels. That's a considerable amount of energy density. Because nuclear energy is more efficient, it requires less fuel to power the plant and therefore creates less waste as well. Now, we're going to be tackling about its disadvantages. First things first that comes to mind is it is really expensive. Despite its low cost on how it operates, building a nuclear power plant are incredibly expensive to build. That's why it is one of its disadvantages. Second is its impact to the environment. Nuclear power plants have a greater impact on the environment than just by the waste they produce. The mining and enrichment of uranium are not environmentally friendly processes. Open pit mining for uranium is safe for miners but leaves behind radioactive particles, causes erosion, and even pollutes nearby sources of water. Underground mining isn't much better and exposes miners to high amounts of radiation while producing radioactive waste rock during extraction and processes. Third is its security threat. We all know that nuclear power plants present a unique threat to our national security because it is powered by quote-unquote nuclear energy. It might be a target for terrorists with the intention to creating a disaster, or as the uranium in the power plant is used to create nuclear weapons. And if they end up in the wrong hands, well, God help us all. Third is its limited fuel supply. There might be some important pros and cons of nuclear energy, but one of the most important considerations to keep in mind is that nuclear energy is dependent on uranium and thorium to produce energy. Unless we can find a way to create nuclear fusion or build breeder reactors before the supply dries up, we will be unable to create energy with the nuclear power plants we build for the future. Um, the fifth one is that it produces radioactive wastes. Although nuclear energy production does not create any emission, it does produce radioactive waste that must be severely stored so it doesn't pollute the environment. While radiation might sound scary, we are constantly exposed to small amounts of radioactivity from cosmic rays of the sun or the radon in the air that we breathe. In small quantities, radiation isn't harmful, but the radioactive waste from nuclear energy production is incredibly dangerous. And lastly, accidents. One of the first things most people think when they hear nuclear power plants is accidents. As the the famous accidents in that famous accidents that revolves around power plants. Here we could see why most people think of accidents when they hear about nuclear power plants because of these famous nuclear catastrophes that occurred in Pennsylvania in 1979, the famous Chernobyl in 1986, and in Fukushima in 2011. Furthermore, when talking about nuclear power plants, there's always a nuclear waste. So there are different types of nuclear waste, which is high, medium, and low activities. And the solution of disposing nuclear waste is through deep geological storage. Disposal of low-level waste is straightforward and can be undertaken safely almost everywhere. Storage of used fuel is normally underwater for at least 5 years and often in dry storage. So, deep geological storage is widely agreed to be the best solution for final disposal of the most radioactive waste produced. And lastly is destination. When we talk about radioactive wastes, we don't really know where it might headed unless it's like destruction to us and the environment. So right now there are no precise and clear destination of where we can somewhat recycle or use nuclear wastes. Lastly, we're going to be talking about the uses of nuclear technology. I will be brief in this one. So, one of its main uses is for space exploration, so that it makes space travel or exploration possible. Also, it is useful in the medical field because it provides images inside the human body and can help to treat diseases. Next is its water desalination. It removes salt from salt water to make water drinkable because somewhat in the near future, drinkable water will be more rare. Next is agriculture and food. Um, it might sound a little bit sussy that nuclear, something involving nuclear is helpful for our food, but it is. It prevents harmful insects from reproducing and kills bacteria and other harmful organisms in food. And lastly, environmental tracers. It might be really, really bad for the environment, but radioisotopes can detect and analyze pollutants so that we could read that pollutants and somewhat find a, a solution in that pollutants. And that's it. Thank you for watching the video and have a good day, guys. Thank you.